This is a video on the world of Tarkir and how dungeon masters or world builders can use it and its construction to help build their own societies in more interesting ways. But one of the cool things about doing videos like this is you sometimes find in the writing of the script that you've got a more interesting discussion than you thought you did when you started. That's what we're going to talk about now. Not just the world of Tarkir, but also change, and more importantly, expectation. Wizards of the Coast, the company that makes both Magic the Gathering and D&D, takes a special delight in giving players what they want in ways they aren't expecting. Two big examples for this are Zendikar and Innistrad. Zendikar is the adventure plane that's full of change and turmoil and hidden treasure to discover, and Innistrad is the gothic horror plane, a plane about man versus monsters with vampires, werewolves, and the like. Both of these planes were massive successes when they came out originally, and when Magic was returning to them, players were very excited. But Wizards decided to do things a little bit differently. Zendikar was less about adventure and more about a horrible war against an incredibly powerful threat, and Innistrad lost a lot of its gothic horror and took on a bit more Lovecraftian, eldritch horror. The echoes of what players used to like about the planes were still there, but faint, as if through a mirror dimly. Players here experience what we like to call a negative surprise. Yes, Wizards subverted their expectations, but the surprise that the players got was they were surprised to find the things that they were excited for weren't there. Our first lesson for world builders or DMs is that you can play with negative surprise, but it is quite a bit like playing with fire. After all, people engage with the worlds we build because it's enjoyable, it's fun. And so there's only so much fun you can deny or subvert before people start to get a little bit unhappy, a little bit antsy. Tarkir is a world built on what Magic the Gathering players call wedges. If you know our videos at all, you're used to the color pie, but just in case you're new, we'll give you a quick rundown. Magic the Gathering has 5 colors. These colors influence game mechanics, but more importantly, they each embody a worldview, a philosophy, a lens that the world is looked at through. You have whites, peace through structure; blues, perfection through knowledge; blacks, satisfaction through ambition; reds, freedom through action; and greens, wisdom through acceptance. We've already done a video, and you can hopefully click somewhere around here, on what happens when you take 3 colors together, where you have a color and its 2 friends. But what we're going to look at today is societies where you would take a color and their 2 enemies. In that video, we talked about how the dissonance between the 2 enemy colors was solved by the resonance with the remaining shared color. But as you can see, that's not really an option for wedges. To see an example of how to world build a society that's built more on difference than commonality, you'll have to check into our next video, because that's not what this one's about. Because this is where Wizards defied expectations. Take Mardu, for example. White, black, red. The obvious thing here to do is to focus on the enemy color, because that's where you're getting a lot of your tension, a lot of your dissonance, a lot of your interesting conflicts are coming out of that. But that isn't the easy option that Wizards of the Coast went for. The Mardu Horde is actually focused on red. So it's not about 2 enemies and an ally, it's actually about an allied pair and an enemy pair. And this construction is really quite interesting. But why do this, you ask? Or at least I hope that's what you're asking. It's because Tarkir was planned around change. Each clan would be introduced and then go through a massive cultural shift. See, the world of Tarkir was defined by 5 clans, each of which warred with a horde of terrifying dragons. The story is actually a lot more involved than we need to get into, but essentially the dragons won the war and the clans had to adapt to survive and really change what made them special. So the reason that the clans were centered on one of the ally colors and not the enemy is because each clan would go through a similar shift where the enemy color would be left behind, and 3 would become 2. It's this change, this culture in motion, this dynamism that we're really going to focus on. As world builders, as dungeon masters, it's much too easy to create static worlds, cultures that don't change and that have this sort of hollow ring to them, because that isn't really how cultures work. Cultures are always in motion. The dynamic, changing nature of a real world society is something that we should do our best to at least somewhat capture if we want our worlds to feel alive, and I think most of us do. And the worlds of Tarkir really is the best place to go for a case study and to learn about this kind of building. Well, there is a degree in cultural anthropology, but I personally don't have the 4 years lying around, so we do what we can with what we have. So first is the Abzan houses. And if you're a world builder, I mean, this is a real treat. So Abzan is built around black, green, and white, and its core color is white. What that means for how Tarkir does its wedges is that Abzan is about white, green, and white, black. So we actually have a video on all of the color pairs. Two, in fact, maybe they'll be around here somewhere. But simply, it's green-white is all about community and coming together, collectivism. And black-white is about a tension between white and black. White likes selflessly giving to others, and black is much more into the selfish provision for yourself first. So this tension is at the core of black-white. And when you add green, it gets weighted much closer towards white's end, but black is still felt. And what I mean by this is that Abzan is built around families. There are strong ties to family units, and families are willing to put themselves on the line for each other. So that's where the green-white comes in. But also, the families are a little bit disconnected. They might not necessarily be willing to go out of the way to help each other. You know, your brother, your sister, that's an important person to you. A member of a different family to yours might not matter so much in the same way. So that's the effect that black has on the Abzan houses. It's not a large community, it's a bunch of smaller, more selfish communities. But the really wonderful world building detail in the Abzan is the practice of kin trees. Every family has a special tree that they fight that they fight zealously to protect. When they die, they'll feed their family will feed the remains to the tree, and their name will be inscribed upon it. And whenever that tree's sap is imbibed, all the spirits that have collected within it, their wisdom and their strength can be called upon. So you have this really interesting kind of necromancy. I mean, black is all about necromancy, if that makes sense, but in a very green-white way. And it's a beautiful mesh of dissonance and resonance, of familial love and sort of unearthly horror. So in this way, the desert that the Abzan call home is actually a secret forest of trees that you can't see because they're in buildings or under the ground. Trees that have a whole genealogy at their roots. Of course, this video is about change. How does the Abzan society go through change? Well, all of the changes are instigated by the dragons winning the war, but the exact mechanics that cause each of the wedges, the clans of Tarkir, to shift their culture is a little bit different. We start with Abzan because this is the simplest one. They changed their culture due to an outside pressure. The desert dragons, led by their champion Dramoka, sort of swooped in and began to massacre the Abzan, and the dragons eventually communicated why they were slaughtering the Abzan. They found the necromantic kin tree tradition quite disgusting, and they gave the Abzan a very simple ultimatum. Burn down every tree, say goodbye to your family, say goodbye to your individual houses, come together, form a collective society that we the dragons can get a better eye on. And that was really, there wasn't much of an opportunity. Some of the Abzan tried to rebel and secretly keep up the kin tree practice, and most of those dead, having a terrible time. Abzan was changed through direct cultural mandate into a much more collective society. The black was purged from to suit the outside pressure's desires. Next then is the Jeskai way, made up of blue, white, and red. When blue and white come together, they enjoy making structures that help everyone, societies with strict rules. And blue and red have a disagreement as to where you should live your best life from. Red says that you should live by your heart, and blue says you should live by your mind. And because white's in this, and white's quite a conservative color, it doesn't like impulsive action, this kind of thing gets pulled much more to blue-white's end of the spectrum than with red. But red is still felt because of the fervent passion that is invoked by the Jeskai way. They commit a series of monasteries on high cold steppes, and they commit themselves to their monastic training with a real zealotry, a real passion, and that is how red is felt. They're not cold or emotionless, they live with their emotions in a way that's very appropriate. But it is that passion that we see expunged from the Jeskai when the dragons winning the dragon war changes their society forever. So what happened here was that the mountain dragons, led by their champion Ojutai, again had the Jeskai on the ropes. They were purging the Jeskai unless the Jeskai were willing to give in to their demands. But this time it wasn't a direct change of their cultural practices exactly. It was something a little bit more insidious. Ojtai and the dragons gained access to the Jeskai's history library, to all of their libraries, and literally rewrote, scroll by scroll, page by page, letter by letter, the entire history of the Jeskai, and forbade any recollection or discussion of the past as it was. And so in this way, the culture was forced to, essentially overnight, view itself differently. The passion was expunged from it, and the history was rewritten in a way that made everyone quite placid and easy for the dragons to deal with. There are a variety of reasons why a real-life society might start to view itself differently, but in Tarkir it happens very, very literally. Soon, Ojtai becomes the Jeskai's only real source of new knowledge, and he has them all very patiently meditate and constantly seek enlightenment. What kind of enlightenment exactly? Well, enlightenment now is whatever Ojtai says it is. If you'd like a real-world parallel of this kind of thing, just give your grandparents a ring. You'll find that the world they grew up in is very different when looked at through your eyes. The next kind of change is a political downfall, and that's what we see in the Sultai brood. Green, blue, and black. Blue and black come together in their shared belief that any taboo can be crossed, and all rules are made to be broken in the pursuit of perfection or personal ambition. Green and black have a big disagreement. Green says that traditions and finding your place in a shared culture is a very important thing to do, and black says that nothing could matter less. So because of blue's more practical, more intellectual, and less traditional leanings, blue's progressive, whereas green is conservative, the Sultai are pulled more to that direction, but you can still see the green in the fact that the Sultai brood made a lot of traditions, a lot of deals, a lot of cultural and political bargaining with Rakshasas and demons. So that's where a lot of the Sultai's power came from. Although the society didn't necessarily want to be very traditional, they found themselves adopting the traditions of the Rakshasas and the demons just to keep them on side. If you don't know what a Rakshasa is, by the way, it's like a tiger person demon with backwards hands. Older D&D was pretty bizarre. However, peace is always just a temporary respite from culture's natural tendency towards conflict. What happened here is that the Rakshasas and Nagas felt slighted after a while. They felt like their traditions and culture wasn't being respected enough, and they just left. And that vacuum, that sudden powerlessness, the sudden diminishment of their forces, meant that the Sultai had absolutely no hope to handle the incoming dragon incursion. Despite their best political machinations and schemes, now the proud people of Sultai are forced to spend most of their energy creating diversions and distractions to placate their ambitious and paranoid draconic overlords. The balance of power is often delicate, and even a small shift in allegiances can catapult a culture towards huge change. The Sultai don't have room for traditions anymore. It's every man for himself to survive this dragon-ruled hellscape. Next is the Mardu horde, who valued the dragon's swiftness. Oh, actually, that's a worldbuilding detail that I forgot to mention earlier. Each of the clans valued something different about the dragons. The Jeskai really valued the dragon's cunning, the Abzan valued the dragon's endurance, the Sultai valued their ruthlessness, and the Mardu valued their speed. I think that's a little bit interesting. It tells you something about Mardu psychology, where they look at gigantic terror death lizards, and the thing that they think about them is, quite fast. A roving clan of murderers and marauders, the Mardu were a perfect embodiment of their three colors, red, white, and black. Red and black came together in the desire to do anything to feel satisfied. They were very impulsive, very happy to murder, to maim, and to kill if that's what made them feel good at the time. But white was still there, so red and white's big disagreement is order versus chaos, and white is on the order side, red's on the chaos side, and selfish, opportunistic black definitely drew the Mardu more towards the chaos end of that spectrum, but white definitely was still belt. The Mardu were a clan all about honor and rules, some tenets as to how they should live their lives. They were marauders, but they weren't honorless marauders. In particular, one of the interesting cultural aspects about the Mardu was that anyone who hadn't killed someone yet didn't have a real second name. They were called soft heel. It was only when you slew your first foe in battle that you became a real warrior, a real part of the horde, and got a second name. A lot of those second names came from how you killed that foe, so you have things like Swift Spear, Helm Crasher, all that kind of thing. But it's this ritualistic and honor part of Mardu society that ended up being lost and changing over time. The fourth way that a society can change is regression. I don't mean a fall to degeneracy or anything so esoteric. No, on Building Better Dungeons, we're big fans of degeneracy. We mean that White's intrusion was always an unnatural one. There was always a lot of tension because of White's inclusion in the society. Mardu weren't actually forced or subjected to a lot of outside pressure. The dragon champion of the region, Coligan, actually decided not to subjugate the people, at all. The Mardu ended up tossing down their banners and joining Coligan as equals. What changed their society was just the passage of time. Naturally, over time, the Mardu rejected order and honor and became more self-serving and ruthless. That's something to keep in mind with the cultures you create. Sometimes change is merely motivated by changing perceptions, as people try to make easier sense of their place in the world around them. Lastly, the Temur. These valued the dragon's savagery, and so Red and Green's love of savagery and instinct was a big part of the clan. Green and Blue disagree on whether true insight comes from without or within. Green says within, and so does Red, so Temur was definitely leaning in that direction. But Blue did have a space in the shamans called Whisperers. Whisperers could evoke a type of time magic to commune with the ancestors of the tribe. So if you weren't so instinctual, if you were a bit more of a thinker, there was a spot for you in Temur. But it was that spot that wasn't to last. When the Temur were faced with a losing dragon war from the champion of the cold frigid wastes where they lived, at Tarkir, surviving by cooperating and keeping the almost feral dragon satiated with food, they didn't object when Tarkir, in a fit of fear, purged the Temur of their shamans, personally severing them from their past and disconnecting them from what it meant to be Temur. In this, we see the last lesson that Tarkir has to teach us. We've seen 4 different ways that societies can shift. First is direct influence, as in a new neighbor comes along or a new trading partner opens up and the society is forced to change because of these demands. Second is the society begins to view itself differently, whether because of a propaganda campaign or just a natural shift in their self-perception. Maybe more information comes to light about their situation, and so the society begins to view itself differently and therefore become different. Third is a change in political situation from within or without the society, a change in how the people inside actually organize themselves in relation to themselves and the world around them. And the fourth was a regression from a high energy, complicated state towards a more simple one. And the fifth lesson that Tarkir has to teach us is that these don't have to be mutually exclusive. The Temur shifted because of a mix of a change in self-perception caused by the purging of their history, their whisperers, and a direct impetus. They suddenly couldn't spend any amount of time keeping up their cultural tradition of being warriors. Instead, they had to change almost entirely to hunting to keep the dragons fed and happy, to prevent them from being their next meal. So there we have it. 5 fascinating clans and 4 different ways of changing your culture over time. I love the effort that Wizards put into having the shift be for a variety of different reasons, you know? I mean, it could have all been like with the Abzan. It could have all been just dragons coming in and forcing people to live differently very directly. But there was actually a lot of variation in how the clans fell and changed over time. So hopefully now you have all the tools you need to build dynamic, interesting, and vibrant cultures, and keep them dynamic, interesting, and vibrant as your campaign or your story continues. And at the very least, hopefully you had some fun hearing about one of Magic's wildest planes. If you liked this video, you could subscribe to get more just like it. And if you were to share it with anyone you think would get something out of it, then, I mean, that would be radical. But most importantly of all, you could join our Discord linked in the description to hang out with us and a small, thriving little community of like-minded Magic the Gathering D&D aficionados. Anyway, hope the video was good. Thank you so much for watching this far. Hopefully I'll see you later. Peace.